Casual Yelling, a conversational podcast with 85% yelling, possibly 60% yelling this week. I'm Matt Elfring. With me today is comedian Papa Suburbs, Matt Drufke. Hi, Matt.
I don't think I yell that. I think I'm just loud.
You're very loud,
yeah.
because I have to keep adjusting the levels on my mic.
That's not yelling.
Your voice is your voice carries.
Motherfucker, I will yell.
You're just like, hey everybody, it's me, Matt Drufke, bouncing off the walls.
You know what? So much of that came from is performing comedy those early years in rooms where
bars
in bars where they didn't know comedy was going to happen.
Bars that kept the Blackhawks game on.
Yeah, well, yeah, but like where it was like you're on the main floor and people are just having drinks and dinner, and then in the corner a comedy show just kind of appears. My rule was always, I'm never going to chastise someone who's not paying attention.
Yeah,
because we're just ruining their night. But what I will do is I will tell my first two jokes like 20% louder than I normally do, just to make sure that like I'm getting my voice out there and I'm establishing a tone. And at that point, if someone wants to hear me, they'll turn around and listen. And if someone doesn't, I will politely leave them be. And I'm not going to give them shit if they're going to talk. Talk to their neighbor or whatever.
Well, I mean, because there's a difference between doing a show in a comedy club, or a comedy room, as compared to every single bar we performed in.
Yes.
Which is,
do you remember? Oh my God, that Pub 222 night when they had the Blackhawks game on.
Okay, so this is the third time Pub 222 is come. This is a St. Charles, Illinois pub that no longer exists.
No. Was their comedy show terrible? Yeah, it was. Did the microphone, because the microphone was plugged into the house PA.
Yes.
So if you stopped talking for any length of time, the music kicked in. Do you remember that?
It's just, here comes Lou Bega's Mambo number 5.
Yeah, like if you got a laugh and you're like, oh, I need to wait for this laugh to die down. Then all of a sudden, like Nickelback starts pouring in through, and you're just like, oh, all right.
Look at this photograph.
So there's one night, you and I are on the show, and I remember I had to get up early to work the next day. And the Blackhawks had a hockey game. They had
this was playoffs.
Yeah, they had a playoff game. And I remember messaging, I think it would have been Tom Franklin at the time, because I think he was running that room. And I'm like, hey, is this show happening? Because if not, great. I can just know that. I'll go somewhere. I'll do whatever. I'm like, but if it is happening, and he's like, no, it's happening. It's going to start at 8. And I'm like, okay, that's the hockey game. And he's like, no, I think it's fine. Like, I think they'll watch it in the bar, but we're not in the bar. Which is true. We weren't. We were in that side room. However, we arrive and we are told, no, there's no comedy happening during the game because you're plugged into the house PA. So people won't be able to hear you. So I got very drunk in anger. Yeah. I think you got slightly tipsy, but they must have been playing, I'm going to guess Vancouver, because and they got killed that game. Hawks
they did.
So not only were people angry, but whenever Vancouver scored, you and I would sing "Oh Canada" at an obnoxiously loud level.
I'm half Canadian. I'm allowed to do that. It's part of my lineage.
And I hate hockey, so I'm allowed to irritate Blackhawks fans. At that moment, I hate hockey.
Yeah.
I would say, on average, I find hockey fine.
Yeah.
So then it was then I had not kind of done the math where I was like, hey, everyone at the bar, you know how you've aggressively hated me for 2.5 hours? Does anyone want to come into this room and watch me tell little yuck jokes?
That's right, because we waited until after the game to do comedy, which was the worst idea.
The worst decision. I think I was supposed to headline that night, and I was like, no, I'm going first, and then leaving immediately.
Wasn't, because this was, I wouldn't say this was early on in us doing comedy. This was a few years in.
Yeah.
But we had open mics with headliners, which seems so bizarre to me.
This wasn't an open mic. This was a showcase.
Was it a showcase?
Yeah.
I guess it was. I always felt like it was, like how Burt Borth ran his comedy show at Walter Payton's Roundhouse.
Like the Thursday nights were the open mic. But yes, he would have an open mic headliner, which was always just whoever brought the most people. So it was always Eric. Eric Resendiz.
Yeah.
So that was fun in its own way. Here's something I want to talk about, because I know you had recorded it in December, but I just listened to the episode of you and XL.
Yes.
And XL talked about what a wonderful comedian you are.
Yeah.
I totally agree. You always said that you preferred characters. And here is the thing, and I don't think XL summarized this well. Mm-hmm. I always felt like one of the big issues with you when you were just doing stand-up comedy as Matt Elfring
Yeah.
is like you got clearly uncomfortable when jokes weren't reacting. Like when you weren't getting a hit, you would become
I shriveled up.
You would become physically smaller, or you would
Yeah.
like cover your stomach and things like that. And it's a super understandable reaction
Yeah.
that a lot of people have. But where your characters always excelled was that all of them had a confidence that they shouldn't have.
Yes.
Do you think that you would have psychologically been able to create a stand-up comedy character named Matt Elfring and given him the high level of confidence so that if a joke did not necessarily react the way you wanted it to, you would have been able to handle yourself the way a fictional character would have? And I know that's a very weird question, but for like 24 hours, that is all I have been able to think about.
I don't know because
I mean, I get that as a very deep we're peeling layers.
I mean, where I was back then, we're talking at this point 9 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh,
at least.
At least. Compared to where I'm at now, where I'm on mood stabilizing drugs, and I've jokingly said like I didn't know people could go a day without thinking about killing themselves. Like that's where I was at that time.
I understand that.
And I was emotionally really messed up during that time. So when you saw me on stage, that was real me. That's me at home, which I didn't like people seeing. So there's something in the neurodivergent community, which I produce a podcast, Gifted Can Miss the Adult, called masking, where you pretend everything's okay, but it's not. And I feel like when I was Joey Savior, Edward Smathers, all these weird characters, I wasn't me, so it was very easy to be not me on stage. When I was actually me, and not like confidence me, like when I was on camera doing like shit with GameSpot or whatever.
Yeah.
Which that's different. I called that flipping the light switch before I knew what masking was. It was very easy for me to be on camera and be like, hey guys, we're here at San Diego Comic-Con. We're having a great time, right? And like inside I'm dying. I couldn't do that on stage. And I do not know why. I'd get through that first bit and then I would just die.
I mean, I think there is something to be said about, like, the one thing I always said that I had to realize was unhealthy was I always felt like when people were saying like, I just don't like your jokes, that's in a way being like, I don't like you, because all of my jokes were about me. So I'm like, how do you, I don't know. I had a very hard time for the longest time differentiating the two of understanding where my material ended and where I began.
Yeah.
And that sounds, look, it took me a lot of therapy to kind of work my way through.
There was a lot of on-stage therapy, I remember, for a while, too, when you were going through some shit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I went through a divorce that was not easy. And what's funny is, like, I say not easy, and then I hear about other people's divorces.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, no, it wasn't easy. Like, we settled things pretty amicably, and, like, we knew we had to have a certain level of friendliness and compassion and understanding because we were, our son was 7 at the time.
Yeah.
And so I think what was hard for me about that was that, like, all I wanted to do was just get out of that situation, was just be like, all right, cool. If I don't see anyone for a while, then like I can let things scar over.
Yeah.
And it was like having an exposed scar every day. And so how do you feel better about yourself? Well, alcohol helps.
Yeah.
And yelling into a microphone also helps.
Yes.
Especially if you get some sort of positive reaction. So,
I've had many friends get divorced throughout, the years I've been around. With you and your ex-wife was still coming around and making cookies for people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and no one's ex-wife that I knew out of any of my friends would like still hang out and still be like,
yeah,
cool.
like she was at my album recording, which was awkward, but at the same.
But I mean, like that's how you were still getting support from her.
Sure, and I also understand that from her perspective, and like to this day, we are still friends. Like I just saw her a couple weeks ago, and it was very pleasant. She has a new son, and like it's great seeing him and great seeing her being a mom again to a child of that age, and so like there's so much wonderful stuff there in the time. And especially because, like, I wasn't dealing with a lot of my problems then that was all being compounded.
But now, but you got. I'm going to say get over that. You got over the hump. We'll say.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And now you're in a much better place now, to a point where I came to your wedding.
Yeah.
And crashed it with someone you didn't think was going to be showing up.
That was interesting.
Because I got drunk before your wedding and then showed up in an Uber with one of my friends who you knew, but you weren't really.
Yeah. It was weird for me. It was weirder for Erin. And like every now and then we still talk about like if like we're going through Facebook memories and I'm showing her pictures and she'll see a picture of Fitzy and she'll be like, hey, you remember when he came to our wedding and we didn't invite him? And I'm like, oh, yes, I do.
I feel like that is I didn't know the boundaries because I was going to bring my wife, but we had a newborn at that time. And this was my first night away from the newborn. And I'm like, there's no one funnier to hang out with to me alone than Sean Fitzpatrick.
Well, and here's what was super weird about our wedding is that we had a relatively smaller wedding.
Yes.
And we were having, so like my friends who were comedians and her friends who were teachers, we had a rule that was like, unless we both knew who the spouse was, they couldn't come.
Yeah.
So like Erin had met Nina before. And, and there are teachers where like I had met the husband before. So of course they were welcome.
Yeah.
But there were comedians. So a lot of people just didn't have plus ones.
Yeah.
So I think at some point when we were just, it was weird because there were people who like we each kind of knew who we would have wanted to see there, but we just didn't have the logistics. And then Sean Fitzpatrick shows up. Who, again, a delight of a man. And I would never want Sean to feel otherwise.
No. And I would say one of the most alt comics.
Yes.
Weird sets that I really, really love.
And willing to do real silly things. He made me a great poster, which was my neighbor Popozow. Of the bus stop and the girl next to Kevin Federline. It's fucking fantastic.
How are you feeling? Because you're like probably 18 years, 17 years in the comedy.
17 years in, yeah.
How are you feeling about yourself as a comedian compared to when you started? It was a different thing, but how do you feel about yourself and where you're at now?
I go up less. I go up as little as I've ever gone up before. I have a long-standing agreement with my wife. And if people need to know, my wife and I, we have a 3-year-old son. So if I do a show during the week, I don't go up to the show I produce.
Okay.
So I go out once a week.
Yeah.
And that's a very fair number for me. But the good news about that is like, now that I'm not super concerned about like getting booked at clubs or what shows I need to be in or whatever, every joke I do can be like just something I love doing. If I want to do something a little weirder, I can. If I want to work on something that I truly believe in, instead of just being like, no, here's this crowd and I've got 3 shows tonight, so like I better make sure I like follow the formula of things that work. Because like if people are listening to this and they're not a comedian, often when you're featuring, like if you're the middle guy, you're doing 25 minutes a night, or if you're closing and doing a headlining set, and if you go up more than once a night, repetition is super important.
Yes.
Because you don't want to get to the second or third show of the night and think, does this joke sound familiar because I've already told it at earlier shows? Or does this joke sound familiar because it's the second time this set I've told it?
Yeah.
So it's so important to be like, my jokes have an order, and this is where they start and where they end, and I do not break from that unless there is like a big issue.
Yeah.
So, but now that I know, like, look, if I'm going, and there are nights I go to Still on Friday that I don't go up. I'm just there to hang out. But when I go up, I can be like, all right, I can do what I want. Like I can get real silly. I still want it to go well, and I still want the room to care about what I'm doing. But I can create whatever I want to create, and that has become so freeing to me that I am happier now with my material. Like I'm starting to understand what a new record can look like. Yeah, and I'm excited about that process, but also not in a hurry to do it because like I'm not using it as a booking tool. I would use it truly as like me trying to make a piece of art that I like having out in the world.
Yeah, and I think you're one of the first people I knew that put out an album. Like we recorded it. I mean, locally. Not like you're the first person to ever do a comedy album. Weird.
It was Bill Cosby, then me. I knew. I mean, I think part of that is because when I grew up, I loved comedy albums. Yeah, and I just wanted to consider myself like, should I have put out a record? And not that I'm not tremendously proud of it. But like, was I an established enough name to have put out a record? Probably not. And like, which is why like it was independently produced. It was not part of a label. But like, I'm still super proud of the work I made and all of the of like the art I created and all of the work I did to get to that point. I was very proud of that. So I was really enjoying. Like I love that album. I'm super proud of it. But it's also why like probably like 6 different times I've said I've been ready to record another record.
Yeah.
And then something big has happened in my life that I was like, well, now I need to stop and think about this because like, so the first record came out in 2012.
Yeah.
And then I got divorced and went through a spiral. And I'm like, okay, well, that's the record. And then I kind of pulled myself out of that a little bit. I'm like, okay, well, that's the record. Then my dad got real sick. And then I got married. And then I had a kid. You know, and then like COVID happened. Like, and now I'm in this spot where it feels like things have kind of, I don't want to say settled down because they certainly haven't.
It never settles down when you have like a small child.
I'm tired and frustrated all the time. But like that I know what my life looks like and that I think I can properly through art give an accurate representation of what that is.
Yeah.
And as well as like, I feel as mentally healthy as I've ever been. Like since that last record, I have been seeing a therapist for the better part of 5 years. I've been on an antidepressant for the better part of 3 years. I have this amazing beard.
The beard is good.
Oh, it's
a solid beard.
I love this beard. You know, I've been doing things like what you said jokingly is that like there wasn't a day you didn't think about killing yourself. I never expected myself to be 40 and I'm going to be 45.
Yeah.
You know, in May. And even I wouldn't have expected, I could say that like when I turned 40 that I wasn't sure I was going to see 45. Yeah. But like I'm at a better spot in my life when I don't, it is a very rare day that I have that mentality. And it's been a very, very long time since I've like actively fantasized about acting on those ideas.
Yeah.
And so like, I am in a very happy place and I try and spread that in my comedy. And I certainly try and spread that in the way I produce a show.
Yeah.
And so that's like, that works for me in a very effective way.
You're also like, well, because when we started, I think you might have started about a year before me because I was in Chicago. Then I came out to the suburbs.
Yeah. 2006 is when I started.
2000. Yeah. I was doing 2006.
I feel like we started right around the same time.
Yeah.
You were more Chicago centric and I was just kind of like going anywhere.
I started where you should quote unquote start.
Yeah.
And then I came to the suburbs. But the scene when I was out here was there was an open mic at a hookah bar. And then Burt Borth was running Walter Payton's Roundhouse.
Yeah.
And then there was Zanies, which none of us would ever be able to get into at that time. And that was it.
I mean, there were some weird outliers, like Riddles was around.
Oh, that's right.
Doing the Monday open mic. There was a place called the Barrel of Laughs.
Yeah.
Which had an open mic that I got thrown out of.
There's a place in downtown Elgin.
Yeah. And there were, you know, and so you were like finding music open mics. You would just do, but yes, there was no scene.
Yeah.
Because there was no idea of like people continuously coming together except at the Roundhouse. And I never felt out of place. I never felt fully like I belonged there.
Yeah.
One thing, because I was like the youngest guy there. Like I was 26, which is now crazy saying that I was the young guy at 26. As so often now you see people starting comedy 18, 19, 20.
But all the guys at that, I say guys because it
was all men.
It was all men. It was always dominated
Amelia
by men.
and Kat Rabarski, and that was it.
Yeah, and it was all like guys in their 40s to 70s doing one-liner jokes.
Yeah.
And also a lot of racist jokes, which did not...
And then getting upset that they weren't being discovered by Zanies. Like all of them wanted to do more work in Chicago, and I'm like, well, when do you go into Chicago?
You got to do Chicago open mics if you want to be in Chicago.
Yeah, and they're like, no, and I'm like, well, have you emailed Zanies? And they're like, no, and I'm like, what do you think is gonna happen?
You're not just gonna be discovered at Walter Payton's Roundhouse.
Yeah, there's not like
there's no audience.
It's not like the minor leagues where like there's a guy in a
scout for comedy, just like I hope this guy tells that joke about 69 degrees. He doesn't care what temperature it is. I'm just giving that shout out to Pops because I love that joke. I don't know if Pops is alive.
I hope he is.
I hope he is too.
Yeah, but like there was no understanding of like you had to experience things. And then when I started realizing that I could learn more spending time in Chicago, because when I was starting to go to Chicago a lot, like early 2007, a bunch of people had just left.
Yes.
Like Kinane had left, Kumail had left, Matt Bronger had left, but like Cameron Esposito was still there.
That's right.
Drew
yeah.
Michael was just getting started. Hannibal Buress was obviously like the legend at that point. Like when he showed up, people paid attention. Adam Burke was and is still there.
Yeah.
And so like you would go to a place like Shuba's, which was this Sunday night mic where everyone showed up, and I would sign up and I'd be like, all right, I'm 13th on the list. And then it was, hey, you have to wait because Hannibal's going up. Hey, you have to wait, Cameron's here.
Yeah.
Hey, you have to wait, TJ Miller showed up. Hey, Nick Vatterot's here. Like, and all these people would just keep showing up. And then at the end of the night, it's like 1 a.m. I'm now 47th in line.
Yep.
And you just have to learn, like, all right, well, that's what it is.
But
But
you can't take it personally.
no, and it's also, you have to, it's not just that you can't take it personally. You have to understand what an amazing school session you're
Yes.
getting. I have never been a guy who thinks it's a better idea to go to 4 open mics in a night.
Yeah.
I think you can learn just as much, if not more, than being at one open mic and paying attention to
Yes.
everyone else.
Yes.
Like, you get so much more perspective being able to watch something from the audience perspective and to be like, oh, this works, this doesn't work. Is this something I do? Is this something I don't do?
Mhm.
How do I figure that out? It's why I've always kind of enjoyed this concept of a suburb scene where it was like Monday night Comedy Shrine, Tuesday night Mojos, Wednesday night, and it used to be A-OK.
Yeah.
Like, and you would go to a place and you'd sit and you'd watch and you'd be supportive and you'd understand, but you could like, that's how I learned, is so much from being like, oh, this guy is not doing, why is he not doing well?
Mhm.
Oh, this person's doing very well. Why are they doing well?
Yeah.
And like, if you're willing to be curious and ask those questions, you get just as much of an education as you do getting on stage 4 times for 4 minutes each.
Yeah.
I just think, and again, I'm not dismaying that, the people who do the hustle and do
It's
that,
different cultures
and
that's
also like
fine.
different ways to learn, you
Yeah.
know, and I'm super aware of that. But it's also, I think that so much in comedy, you get this dismissal idea where if like, it's this way or you're not doing it right. And it's like, no, like at the end of the day, comedy is it's pretty easy to see if someone has progressed well at comedy. They're either
Yeah.
getting laughs or they're not. And whatever process they're using to get there, okay, great, so be it. Like,
Mhm.
as long as it's not hurting anyone else, as long as it's not bothering other people, like, great, go ahead. Do what you need to do.
Yeah. But also we saw this a lot in the suburbs because so many people get their start in the suburbs before moving on to Chicago or just quitting comedy in general. When you start out, you are trying to go for easy laughs, which usually back then meant punching down. I think culture has changed so much since then. I mean, there's still offensive comedians around their first year, but you see people that are toxic joining the scene that kind of, I remember doing an open mic. I'm not going to mention the person's name that started this bullshit, but it was Kat Rabarski.
Why are you writing their name on the wall, man?
Kat Rabarski was going up, who later became like a writing partner of mine. Like when we did the Burbies, which is the suburbs.
One of my favorite
award,
writers
ever. We would always perform together and like give, it was like usually best comedian award, which is like, why are we the people doing this? Like there are much funnier people coming up to give awards away. But Kat and I got along really, really well. I remember the first time seeing her go up, and there were 2 other comedians at this hookah bar that we used to perform at. Hi, Andrew Masai. I still talk to you. And I remember 2 comedians there going like, "Ugh, a woman's doing comedy." I'm like, "What? They have different genitals. It doesn't fucking matter. Is she funny? Yes. So like, who cares? You guys aren't funny. That's the difference between her and you."
Well, and also, even if you were, why are you resenting her ability to do so?
Exactly.
Like,
I still remember the punchline to like 4 of Kat's jokes. I do not remember the punchline to most people's jokes.
Kat is one of those people who I right now could get on a stage and do 10 minutes of her material verbatim and get most of it right. Mike Wiley is another one of those comedians.
Oh God, he's great.
Honestly, Lewis is one of those comedians. Lewis Ryan, who hasn't done comedy in fucking forever.
Who has moved away entirely. I know you remember this, but most people don't. As a character, I went on stage and did a 15-minute set of all your jokes, but as Pitbull.
Pitbull Drufke.
Pitbull Drufke. And I would just say, Dale. And then I'd do one of your bits.
Yeah, that always meant the world to me when someone like said, because it meant that like open mics are so hard to stand out at, because
Yeah.
so many people, you're right, because so many people are new, so they fall into like this kind of like Charlie Brown teacher cadence where like even if you're trying to listen, at some point all you're hearing is like wah 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 wah
Yeah.
wah wah.
And then the audience doesn't respond.
Yeah. And so when you have someone who is an independent, interesting voice, that cuts through like a knife through butter, like where you're just like, oh, what is it? Like, and that forces engagement, and it's so good. Yeah. And there are other things that can do that. Confidence is a good way to do that.
Yeah.
But so like, yeah, it's just such a refreshing thing to hear sometimes. And unfortunately, like, and yeah, it is so upsetting that when people don't understand that, like, someone who is a woman, someone who is a person of color, someone who is LGBT, and that
they're judged based on bullshit that doesn't need to be judged.
Yeah.
You judge people on their jokes, not about their sex.
Well, and not only are they judged based on that, but that they're having to sit through an open mic where, and I feel like we're slowly leading into talking about what I wrote, and that they're judged on who they are, like, and that they're hearing comments like judging things that reflect who they are, either through ethnicity or sexuality or gender, and that they're being told like, look, that's not that's wrong, or that that's not as good as what I am, and that now they're being expected to go up. Like you've changed an audience's perspective on on what is going to happen.
I remember Sarah Clancy, who was on this show. I don't think I've the original podcast. I just want to talk to friends. I'll re-upload her episode. Sarah and I have been friends for like a decade. So I remember like you and I went through her joke drafts and kind of helped her. But I remember talking to her, texting with her before she went up for the first time, and the person before her was telling trans jokes, and then she had to go up on stage, and she killed that night.
Yeah.
But I remember her texting me and be like, this is like bullshit, because now I have to follow a person where they're getting some laughs. Not a lot of laughs, but they're getting some laughs at trans jokes. And she's like, how do I go on after that? And all I told her was like, I don't want to swear. I'm just going to swear. I said, fuck the audience. You have the stage. You have the mic. Fuck them.
Yeah. Well, and especially because, and I don't know how, like my interaction with Sarah led to probably 5 months before that first time is when she first reached out and said, hey, I've been thinking a lot about doing stand-up because I want to talk about what it is like being a trans woman in today's culture.
Yes.
And my first thought was like, well, that's incredibly brave and interesting. And I understand that there is a lot of things that you can probably joke about and have it work very well. And so that situation was exactly my fear for Sarah. Yeah. And I commend her. She shows a bravery I have never been asked to possess, in the fact that like she dealt with that like a pro, and she delivered an amazing set. We had her at the show I run as part of our like special Christmas show, and she was brilliant, and her jokes are fantastic. She was just coming up with great premises right away. Like I feel like all the notes you and I were giving were like, take out this sentence, take out this, like we're just like editing things that every comic needed to hear.
It's just flow. You have to have a flow between jokes. You can't ramble on too much.
Yeah. Well, and also understanding that like how you write on paper is not how you speak on stage.
Except for me.
And that the audience is expecting like a certain type of like punchline payoff. So many punchlines for so much time.
It's a rhythm.
Yeah.
It's set up punchline.
Yeah. And so you need to be able to handle it. And I think that Sarah has done super well. Yeah. I hope she's been writing more. We actually just texted recently, and I'm glad to hear that like keeps pursuing this project, because comedy is something that can be very rewarding if you're using it for the right things. It's also something that can be very destructive. I've certainly been on both sides of that.
Yeah.
And so like, but I know the good it can do, which is why I always try and foster that for other people.
Yeah.
That's why it made me super happy that you were getting involved in that, because like, I understand that you're in a position now where you can't do a lot of stand-up, but like you can do this. Like you can help her, you can edit, you can be the support system. And that in a lot of ways is like the best parts of comedy for me now.
Yeah.
Like even more so sometimes than going on stage is like watching someone who I've like helped and giving them an opportunity, and then watching as they absolutely crush gives me the same level of joy as doing well on stage myself.
I want to point something out, and I think I think I've told you. I don't know. This is something I've told very few people. I didn't quit comedy because, first of all, we talked before the show like how I wrote a big post about quitting comedy, which in itself was bullshit. You know, people reading that, but I get my feelings out through writing. That's just who I am as a human being.
Yeah, I understand.
That's why I'm a professional writer. I didn't quit comedy because I couldn't go up anymore. I quit comedy because people in the scene, certain people, I'll tell you the names off off mic, made me feel really shitty at a Burbies show. And I was already kind of on the cusp of leaving. And I love the Burbies, but people were drunk. I've never really drank a lot. And they made me feel less than. There was a lot of animosity, I feel like, towards me because I would go to an open mic and do 6 sets.
But it's not, for starters, it's not like you were doing that at every open mic.
I was doing that at a lot of open mics.
You were at places besides AOK?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. I don't know that I was ever aware of that.
No, I was doing it at a lot of places because I'm not patting myself on the back.
But people wanted to see it.
I was doing 6 different characters, and like we talked about, there at open mics, there can be lulls where you lose the audience. There can be points where someone new in open mic does great. I was filler. I was put up there in different costumes for a lot of these shows.
Like a second host.
Exactly. To get the audience back. And again, I know it sounds like patting myself on the back, but I'm getting out there because I have a different voice than everybody else. And because what I was doing on stage was fucking weird.
Yeah.
But that's what you want the audience to pay attention to the other comedians. And sometimes I would be brought up to get their attention back. And that's fine because I didn't give a shit about making it as a comedian. I was doing it up there because it was fun to me.
Yeah.
It was silly to watch a magician do a child's magic act on stage and then talk about having to want to have sex with everyone in the room. It wasn't just the women, if you really paid attention. I also wanted to bang the men.
Of course. Why would you not? I should say, to fill things in for people who maybe do not know, the Burbies are we do a holiday party at the end of the year. We give out awards. We kind of treat it like an award show. People get dressed up. It's always like this very silly time. The downfall of doing that is that, like, when you're doing awards, it means there are people who don't win, and that
Me.
or there are people who don't get nominated, and that leads to some hurt feelings. And that was never the point of
It's to celebrate things we love.
What we do, yes. And also, it's also the fact that, like, if we just called it a Christmas party, no one would come. They'd want to open mic. And I super understand that. So, like, myself, Amy Blaze, who is, like, the other big, like, proponent of this, and, like, Kristen Toomey when it started, we understood, like, you had to create spectacle. And for lack of a better, not to point myself on not to pat myself on the back, if there's kind of one thing I do better than most, know how to create a spectacle. Like, I know how to like roll out the red carpet. And we've gotten so much help with people like KB Marion and Dave Sitko, and like, but Amy and I are always the people who pushed. Rudy Ruiz, another one of like, how do we make this big, silly, stupid, crazy thing? And fortunately, people seem to really be on board to it. The downside is that there are some people who have gotten their feelings really hurt. And I always feel bad about that. But I also don't know how to change it so that situation doesn't happen.
It's always going to happen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even if your feelings are getting hurt because you're not winning, again, I was nominated 9 times and never won. You gave other comedians that may not get nominated, that may not win, you gave them opportunities to go on stage and present awards. And I feel like there were a lot of people who you knew were still kind of like working the cog and working the machine in order to be a better joke teller on stage. You're giving them opportunities to go on stage, even to do a bit for a minute and a half, and then hand out an award. You're still giving them opportunities. So that's what's important about the Burbies in general.
Well, yeah, and it's just like, it's a night when we're all together. So like Peter John Burns, who is a comedian I love, I think he's a genius writer. Everyone should be checking him out. He like shows up, despite the fact that like he doesn't love hugging people. Like, and he understands, like, he's one of the older dudes on the scene. He bought Don Rickles' tuxedo at an auction, and he shows up every year in tuxedo, and he just has a good time. Like, and he like gets to talk to people and hang out. And especially like last year, like at the time that it happened, our good friend Kenny DeForest had just passed away. We were dealing with kind of like loss. We're all still kind of like trying to figure out what post-COVID comedy looks like. That things are just so complicated. And like, if there's a night when we can all kind of get together and be together, then that's important. That's something that means something.
Hey, man, I'm coming over to your mic because my XLR cable is terrible.
Oh, it's okay. Do you want? I feel like I should also stand. Maybe I don't know.
I don't know. I'm just gonna lean over you.
Oh,
and
I love this.
And our faces are so close.
Oh no! I think I just put. All right, it's okay.
Hey, how about?
No, it's okay.
The first in live one.
Don't get creeped out.
Don't get creeped.
Don't
Our
get creeped
eyes
out.
are so close.
I know.
It's really close.
Oh, I want to lick your glasses right now.
That's really messed up. Hey, you want to go and plug all the things you want to plug? Just go plug.
Yeah, I'm like, if you like comedy, I run a show every Thursday night with some amazing people called Still Not Friday. It's every Thursday at Two Brothers Roundhouse in Aurora. It's an 8:00 show. It's always no cover. Matt and I and other people also write for a great website called FancyBoysClub.com. I just wrote a piece about comedy and how inclusiveness and diversity is a positive thing, and also how not being a shithead is a positive thing.
How dare you?
Everyone, yeah, and you know what? Everyone loved it. Everyone responded 10 of 10. No notes. They were just so welcoming, and it was such a wonderful element, and made me feel like I was having a real good moment for myself.
For it's so hard to do this so close to your face.
All right. I'm only gonna get closer.
Thank you, man, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Coming to my house where I realized I needed a new XLR cable for one of my mics.
Hey, look. If we could do anything, it's talk about breakfast lasagna.
Yeah.
And figure out we need some new cables.
Yeah, please, if you're a paid subscriber to my Patreon, you get breakfast lasagna episode, which is fantastic.
And if you work at Guitar Center, send Matt a new XLR cable.
I mean, I'll just buy one off Amazon.
Oh,
they're cheap.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for listening. We will see you next week. Bye, Matt.
Bye.
Thank you to Matt Drufke for coming on the show. Coming to my house, that's the first time I've done in-person recording. You probably didn't know, but there were a lot of issues with my XLR cord going out and having to, as you heard at the end, record inches from his face. So, new XLR cables have arrived. If you are interested in finding more of Matt Drufke, there will be links in the general description of this episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, all the places. Ending music that you're listening to right now is the song called Gilded Age by the Muggles, featuring Tom Wanderer on singing, Andrew Parks on bass, Will Ash on guitar, and me, Matt Elfring, on drums. You can find us at muggles.bandcamp.com. It is an album we recorded 20 years ago and released in 2023. Anyways, that's it for this week. If you're a subscriber to Patreon, you'll be able to hear the Breakfast Lasagna episode of this show and other Breakfast Lasagna episodes featuring random people being asked about breakfast lasagna. See you next week.